The film starts with a postmodern touch of irony. Paul is sifting through junk, searching for something useful. Meanwhile, a man runs down an alley with sirens blaring in the background, military patrols around, and gunshots echoing. In the countryside, Paul takes one last look at the smoke-covered city and heads to his shelter, where he has hidden 2 crying babies. 15 years later, Paul lives with his teenage sons and a dog in a remote area separated from the world by a deep crevice. One day, Thomas almost doesn't make it back before dark from Rose's farm, which worries Paul. At home, they carefully shut the windows with shutters, securing them with bolts for safety, and then have dinner. Paul warns Thomas that if he's late again, he won't be allowed to leave the property. Joseph teases Thomas about their interest in the neighbors, leading to a minor argument that Paul quickly stops. They spend the rest of the evening playing chess. When the dog starts scratching the floor, Paul and Thomas go downstairs. Suddenly, someone tries to break through the boarded-up door, forcing them to barricade it. When the noise stops, Paul cautiously looks through a peephole and sees no one. Joseph, who stayed upstairs, reports that the intruder tried to break down the door 3 times. In the morning, they find huge claw marks on the door, and while replacing the damaged board, Paul discovers a pile of giant cockroaches. During the day, the family continues with their usual activities. Joseph wants to work on his hobby in the shed, but his father tells him to chop wood first. Later, Paul visits Joseph, who is working on a car, and they discuss the incident. Paul believes that due to environmental pollution, some creatures have come to cleanse the planet of humanity. He thinks that enough people have survived to eventually reunite, and that they will be rescued from the farm someday. Paul helps start the car's engine, and they take Thomas with them on a trip. Afterwards, Thomas wants to run to Rose's farm, but his father tells him to gather supplies first and that the visit can wait until tomorrow. On the way, Thomas accuses Joseph of needing supervision. The brothers argue but agree to split up and meet at sunset. Thomas heads to the farm, supposedly to finish repairing a table, but his real reason is to see the farmer's daughter, Charlotte. She takes him to a tree where she used to play as a child, using a rope to extend the area she could explore. They discuss possible causes of the apocalypse, like a poisonous fog or an infection from an unknown virus spread by insect bites. They embrace goodbye as the sun sets. Meanwhile, Joseph is at the riverbank exploring an abandoned ship. Inside, he finds supplies and a nest of large bugs, the same kind that swarmed their door. The presence of the large bugs forces Joseph to retreat from the abandoned ship. On the shore, the car struggles to start, making Joseph anxious as he counts how much time remains until sunset. Joseph drives back, unaware that Thomas, while trying to jump over the crevice, slipped, hit his head on a rock, and fell. Not waiting for his brother, Joseph returns home alone. Paul orders the house to be locked up, grabs a backpack with supplies, and sets out to search for Thomas, promising to return by morning. Armed with a knife, Paul and his faithful dog head into the forest. Meanwhile, Thomas regains consciousness at the bottom of the ravine. He tries to find an exit using a piezoelectric lighter, but fails. Hearing rustling from awakened creatures, Thomas pulls out a penknife, but it doesn't save him from a monster's attack. The creature thrusts a paw through a hole in the ground. Paul, hearing the commotion, arrives just in time, attacks and kills the beast before descending to his son with a torch. Seeing that Thomas is not seriously injured, Paul decides to stay in the cave until dawn, blocking the passage with stones to prevent creatures from getting through. At home, Joseph dozes off in a chair, not noticing that a viewing window is open from the outside. A long paw of a monster reaches through the gap, extending its sharp claws to an indecent length. It manages to open the shutters from the inside and get into the house through the window. However, this turns out to be a clever trap set by Joseph, who captures the uninvited guest in a homemade cage dropped from the ceiling. In the cave, Paul instructs Thomas to remove one of the stones from the debris to check if any monsters are around. Barely sticking his hand through with the torch, Thomas is attacked and drops the light source. The ground begins to give way as if something is digging beneath them. Paul lights a flare and shoves a gas canister into the hole, instructing Thomas to press against the wall. Paul knocks the cap off the canister, causing an explosion. In the morning, Joseph looks out the window and, not seeing his relatives, sets off in the car to search for them. Thomas digs out the resulting landslide, pulling out his injured father. The faithful dog, having found Thomas, indicates where to go. Joseph and Thomas load their injured father onto the car and head home. They carry Paul to the bedroom, confused and tormented by guilt. Thomas learns that Joseph caught one of the monsters during the night. Joseph covers the box with fabric to avoid harming the captive unnecessarily, thinking it will be useful for study. While treating their father's wounds, Thomas suggests getting rid of the prisoner to eliminate a potential threat. The brothers approach the cage with a knife, but after another quarrel, they simply release the creature outside. It fearfully hides under the bed, away from the light. When the monster emerges, the dog attacks it, provoking a counterattack. Joseph pins the weakened creature to the floor with a mop, and Thomas chops off its head with an axe. Practical Thomas wonders if the monster can be consumed as food, while Joseph performs an autopsy to understand its structure. Distracting his brother from the autopsy, Thomas suggests transporting their father to Rose's farm, where there are adults and medicines. Joseph doubts that strangers will help them, but Thomas insists. They load their father into the truck and head to the neighbors. Charlotte's parents immediately turn them away, saying they don't have enough supplies for strangers. Mrs. Rose allows Thomas to stay, but his brother and father must return home. Disappointed, Joseph walks to the car. Thomas runs after him, accusing him of negligence that is killing their father. The argument escalates into a fight, and Thomas merely strangles Joseph, but stops himself in time. Joseph leaves while Thomas stays at Charlotte's farm, where he forces himself to eat. They retreat to a room assigned to him. But an unexpected visit from Charlotte's father ruins the moment. On his way home, Joseph notices the sheep in the pasture behaving strangely, as if something has scared them. Near the house, a furrow in the ground leads to the basement entrance. After dragging his injured father into the house, Joseph taps the floor to check for hollows. When it's time to close the windows and doors, Joseph suddenly falls into a pit in the kitchen, dug by cunning monsters. Meanwhile, Charlotte finds Thomas rummaging through drawers, looking for medicine for his father. He doesn't want to stay as a guest and abandon his family. Although there is little time until sunset, Thomas convinces Charlotte to share the medications, which she reluctantly does, unaware that one of the workers is eavesdropping on their conversation. With the pills in hand, Thomas runs home but is ambushed by a watchman with a shotgun. The farm workers tie up Thomas, accusing him of theft. The man who caught him threatens to shoot his leg but suddenly falls into a fresh pit. A monster jumps out of the hole and attacks him. Hearing the noise, Charlotte's father wants to check what's happening, but monsters have already invaded the home. Surprised by the sudden attack, he drops a candle, which starts a fire. The mother runs to warn her daughter, but a monster catches her, knocks her to the floor, and infects her, possibly for reproduction. Frightened, Charlotte steps into the hallway and sees a bloody trail leading to a monster, frozen in a strange pose, still alive but seemingly disemboweled. In the barn, Thomas asks the workers to untie him, but they are dragged off one by attacking creatures. Abandoning the captive, the men run outside only to encounter more monsters. Thomas manages to break free from the wooden bar he was tied to, but a monster snaps its jaws in front of him. Suddenly, the monster's head explodes. Charlotte appears with a shotgun. Grabbing the medication, the teenagers run into the night, illuminated by the flames from the burning house. Joseph carefully seals the hole in the floor with furniture and household items. When he hears a knock on the door, hammer in hand, he goes to check. Suddenly, the peephole opens and Thomas's hand reaches for the latch from outside. Thomas and Charlotte climb into the house through the window, recounting what happened. The brothers awkwardly reconcile as Paul regains consciousness. Joseph informs him of the events and asks what they should do next. Logically, Paul advises them to fight back. Following his guidance, the teenagers, under Joseph's leadership, head to the barn and transport canisters of gasoline into the house, storing them in the refrigerator. Joseph prepares a trap by spreading gasoline around and making a detonator from a smoldering cigarette. Thomas and Charlotte barricade the kitchen to prevent the monsters from immediately scattering throughout the house once they emerge from the pit. Soon, the creatures begin their assault, shaking the debris over the hole in the floor. Thomas, armed with a knife, and Charlotte with a shotgun, wait near the kitchen door. When the first monster climbs through the boarded-up door, Thomas stabs it, and Charlotte blows the head off the second one. They then run upstairs, where Joseph is putting the final touches on the trap. Paul, having recovered, comes out of the bedroom. He takes the shotgun from Charlotte and shoots through the floor to create a hole down to the first floor. Then he stands in the doorway and silently strikes an intruding creature with a bat. When another creature breaks through, the brothers beat it down with makeshift weapons. Paul almost sheds a proud tear. The teenagers head to the bedroom, where a shelter has been made out of the refrigerator. Paul locks the door from the outside to delay the creatures. The monsters break down the door and burst into the room, but then the fire reaches the gasoline, causing an explosive reaction. The teenagers wait out the explosion inside the freezer, which eventually tips over. Emerging outside, they try to find their father among the ruins. Suddenly, a burning hand breaks through the debris, frightening the teenagers, who run to the car. Hastily starting the engine, they drive away from the burning house where they spent their brief lives. The surviving monsters pursue them, forming an infernal burning wheel. Charlotte fires the shotgun, and the terrifying chase disintegrates. Stopping to catch their breath, the teenagers see the mesmerizing sight of the starry sky for the first time in their lives. In the morning, they gather the remains and bury their parents under Charlotte's tree. Deciding what to do next, the teenagers get into the car and set off in search of other survivors like them. As the car drives off, Charlotte's old rope tether snaps from the tension, symbolizing their newfound independence. The joyful dog runs alongside the car, and the film ends with the car driving into the distance.